Hello and welcome to a new episode of airportceo here on BongoPlanes. Last episode we worked on mapping out our terminals with the new Alpha 35 update. You were very helpful there with your comments in the last video, and today we will continue our work with the Alpha 35 update, where we will build our first airport lounges and restaurants. So one of the comments in the last video was that we should also make sure that we had some of the vehicle base mapped into terminals, so they would be assigned to specific terminals. Very useful. And you told me how I could assign staff to the different terminals by using the terminal menu we have. The same goes also for GSE. That is really awesome. It has also helped us out a little bit, as we can see here. If you remember last time, our staff situation looked absolutely terrifyingly bad. It's still not great, at least not with janitors and ramp agents, but it is definitely improved from last time. And that's just after having mapped out the terminals correctly. And of course, having assigned staff to the airports. Now we do still need to hire more staff, and we will do so throughout the episode, but our main focus is of course on something else, and that is of course airport lounges and first restaurants at our airport. But before we get going with that, we also quickly want to take a look at our situation with the GSE, because when I was assigning GC to the various terminals, I noticed that there were a few areas where we were short on GSE, so we just need to quickly fix that. And what I also quickly want to do is take a very quick look at the R&D sector. It's actually something that of course came with the Alpha 34, but the R&D menu we have pretty much ignored so far. I'm not quite sure if this works when you are playing in Sandbox, but I think we could try it out, at least do some things that might help us out with the airport, reducing operation times, reducing costs, and so on and so on. So I will try to do a little bit on that as well. And yeah, then hiring a few more people, and then we can take a look at the first airport lounge and restaurant here at Berlin-Tegel. Alright, so the goal will obviously ultimately be to have airport lounges and restaurants at all three terminals that we have, but we will start off here at Terminal 1. Now, quite a long time ago, we laid the foundation for the second floor of our Terminal 1. An area that we kind of didn't have any function for at the time. The inspiration I had for that was basically that we could try to make some form of visitor terrace, although we obviously can't make a real terrace in the game, unfortunately. But that was obviously inspired by real life, where on top of the terminal in Berlin-Tegel, they have a terrace pretty much all the way around the terminal, where you have a fantastic view of the airfield. We will take some of that space. I will still try to somehow in the future make something like a visitor terrace, but we will take some of the space and use it for our airport lounge and restaurants. Technically, I think we would also have enough space for restaurants on level 1, but I do think that restaurants need more space than normal food rooms or normal cafes, so that's why I would like to move it one level up. We will go more into what the difference is between cafes and restaurants a little bit later in today's episode, because firstly we are placing down our very first elevators. They are very simple. You just place them down on one level, and they will then automatically connect the level you place them on and the level above. And that's all. If you then want to extend the elevator, you can do that as soon as they have been constructed by clicking on the elevator, and then you will have a little menu. Very simple, very awesome. So we will connect our level 1 with our level 2 in this specific area with 2 elevators. I guess if this was real life, we would need to have stairs as well, but for fire protection really. But obviously this is not real life, so we will just use elevators. Also, this part that we will be working on here will in the end be sectioned off from the rest of level 2, and that is because it is connecting to our international part of Terminal 1. So we want to keep this separate from the rest of the terminal, which is not international. This also means obviously we need to have both a secure zone and the international zone here at level 2. Otherwise the elevators would not have worked, because elevators, just as stairs or escalators, can't pass from one zone to a different zone. It needs to be the same. So same principles there. Very, very simple. Lounges, again, also very simple. You simply create or zone out the lounge area, and then later you can assign that lounge to a airline. I don't think it works if you don't assign them, so I don't think you can leave them unassigned, let's say it like this. I think they need to be specifically for an airline, as far as I understand. I might be wrong here. I might try out later some point to make a lounge and open it and just not specify to which airline it belongs. But I do think that if you do assign it to an airline, or I know that if you assign it to a specific airline, having a lounge for that airline improves your relationship with that airline. So I guess it just makes sense for you to assign a lounge to a specific airline. I think what we will do here today is it will be a fairly simple layout, and we try to just mirror it. So we make 2 lounges, and then we will also make 2 restaurants. I think one lounge we will assign to Azerbaijan Airlines, because they come in with wide-body aircraft to our airport, so they would always have passengers here in this part of the terminal. And then we will assign one of these lounges to Norwegian, because they also come in with wide-body aircraft to the airport. I know maybe a little bit strange. I don't think Norwegian has any lounges. I don't know if they offer passengers lounges. No idea. I don't think so. But hey, we have them here at the airport. They come in with wide-body aircraft. It would make sense. I would also like to make a lounge for Saudi Arabia Airlines, or Saudi Arabian Airlines, I think it's called. But I couldn't get any flights in the flight scheduler for this episode. I think it's because it's been quite a while since I last assigned any flights, but it doesn't matter. We just started with those 2, and in the future we will make more lounges, so we will try to make lounges for all the different airlines we have here at the airport, or at least for most of them. So when it comes to the interior of a lounge, what you can add there is, for example, an information desk, which I normally always try to add, or which I try to add here at the entrance. I think that's the most logical point to have it. Then they have a new thing they call buffet table. Very nice. Makes sense also for a lounge. And then of course you can just add the normal chairs and sofas and so on as you like. Another thing you can then do inside a lounge, which is very cool, is you can place a bathroom inside the lounge area. So that's what I'm working on here. I make bathrooms, again male and female, and I specify they are only for passengers. And the cool thing here is that obviously these bathrooms can then only be accessed by passengers who have access to the lounge. Very, very awesome. So you have kind of these a little bit more private bathrooms than in the public areas. And then you of course might ask, well, but don't all passengers have access to the lounge? Well, they actually don't. So with the update to Alpha 35, where we have, for example, now this feature of creating lounges, the game developers also made changes to passengers. They made changes to the passenger behavior, which is really awesome. I will get into that a little bit later. But what they have done is that they have actually made changes to passengers in the form of they are now having different needs depending on who they are. So there are, for example, business travelers who might have the need of wanting to go to a lounge, where other passengers might want to go shopping or so on and so on. So that's really awesome, because then we get more distinctive behaviors from passengers and more distinctive needs that we need to fulfill. The other change they have done in the behavior is that, for example, passengers move around less. I mean, or let's say less randomly. When passengers, for example, walked from, let's say, security to their gate, they would go to the gate, they would sit down at a bench if there was one, and then they would just start wandering around for no apparent reason. Passengers don't do that anymore. Now, if they go somewhere, it's because they have a specific need. The great thing is that obviously that's more realistic, but the other thing is also it reduces the load on the game, because before it would then have to animate all these passengers just wandering around for no apparent reason. And that would obviously, or would often affect, for example, the frame rate if you had a lot of passengers in one area. So that's a good thing they have done here with the latest update. Alright, so as you can see, we have a fairly simple design here for our airport lounges, and we're just basically mirroring it. One thing that is important to note that when you have created an airport lounge is, one, you can assign it to an airline, which I think is recommendable. But the other thing is, of course, once you've done that, you actually need to open the lounge. And the same goes for the bathrooms inside the lounge. You also need to open those. If you don't do that, the lounges will just never take on any passengers. I know it might sound fairly obvious, but I think it is still important just to note it, that you actually have to do that. They work just like all other rooms that you would have. For example, a baggage retrieval room, you need to open it once you have constructed it. And it's the same principle here. So unlike, for example, a franchise room or a food room where you just create that and then just assign a contract. And with assigning the contract, it automatically opens or closes the shop depending on time or whatever it determines that on. Here you physically need to open that, and then it will have its own opening hours. Alright, so while our airport lounges are being constructed, we can now take a look at restaurants. How do they work? Well, restaurants are placed inside food rooms. So both for cafes and restaurants, you use the food room zoning tool. Once you have constructed your restaurant, you just assign a contract just as you would have done so previously with a cafe. Now the game just has the distinction that it can be a cafe or a restaurant in a food room, where before Alpha 35 we didn't have that distinction because restaurants didn't work. But obviously a cafe and a food room have different needs. So if you create a food room, then depending on what things you add inside that food room, you will then be able to sign a contract for a cafe or a restaurant. One thing I have noted while I was constructing this restaurant is that the kitchen is quite important. The size of the kitchen, or more specifically really the amount of cooking stations. I think all other features or things you can add inside the restaurant or the kitchen more specifically, they're kind of optional. They're just, I don't know, visual. They don't have any function as such, but the amount of cooking stations will determine what size or what kind of contract you can sign. So the more cooking stations and the bigger the food room, the more attractive contract it seems you are able to get. So for example, in this build, I added 2 cooking stations thinking this would be plenty. But however, when I then came to the point when I wanted to sign a contract, it turned out that for a contract that I wanted, which I think had like 4 or 5 stars, I needed 4. So I extended the kitchen to be able to facilitate that need. Alright, but let's talk a little bit about the basic layout here, or the basic idea behind this restaurant that I had. So basically we just have a big square, then I placed the kitchen towards the land side, because obviously the kitchen doesn't need to have a nice view over the airfield. However, our visitors in the restaurants might want that. So I've added some nice large windows facing the air side so that people can overlook the aircraft while dining. And then we have this massive room, which I then ended up just filling up with tables. Now, I honestly don't think that the restaurants that I'm constructing here will ever become the most financially successful restaurants for the airport, but I think that's just because of the placement. One, it's in the international zone, which is not the most crowded part of Terminal 1, and because they are on level 2 instead of on level 1, where all passengers normally walk around. So I think the amount of passengers finding their way up here is limited, but I think it's still a nice placement to have these restaurants close to the lounges, just for, you know, a little bit of additional, I don't know, feel or additional esprit around the lounges. Also, make sure that you have added at least one till in your restaurant. This might sound super obvious, but when you are making a restaurant for the first time, the game doesn't really tell you what things you can and what you can't add into a restaurant, or which you shouldn't, or want, or which you don't need. You do need a till so that you can get money from the lovely people visiting your restaurant, and without that you won't be able to sign a contract. And then, just as with the airport lounges, we are simply mirroring the restaurant from the left to the right, so that we have two identical, or pretty much identical rooms here, two restaurants, two airport lounges. Perfect. So now we can say that we are the proud owners of an airport which has airport lounges and restaurants for their passengers. However, we do still have a little bit of space left here, which is a little bit to no use so far. But I was thinking, so we have these bathrooms inside the lounges which are specified to be only for passengers, which means that the staff working in the lounge or the restaurants, they wouldn't be able to go to these bathrooms. So we should maybe give them a staff only bathroom, but obviously they don't need a massive bathroom, so we could use the rest of the space for some offices. I mean, normally we make staff rooms like one big staff room where we have everything in it, but I think we could maybe do something a little bit different here and have individual offices for our workers. Whether they will ever use them, I don't know, but I think it could look nice and it would just work very nicely in this whole setup here we have with the lounge and the restaurants. So while we continue our work on that here in the background, I think it is time to get towards the end of today's video. If you have enjoyed it, then it is of course very much appreciated if you leave a like. That really does help us out. And of course, if you are new around here, you're always welcome to hit subscribe. With that, I'd like to say thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you soon again. I'm checking out, and bye.